Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest in the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today's a very special episode. We have Patrick Njoroge on the line. He's the former governor of Central Bank of Kenya, and this interview is part of our Milk and Global series where we bring on leaders who attended the Milk and Global conference. We bring on VIPs, panelists, speakers, and attendees. So first off, Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me at the show.
All right, Patrick. So just to get us kicked off here, so you're at the conference this year, I know in Beverly Hills, the Milken Conference. How did it go? Talk to me about your experience.
I just loved it. This is a space that I think I benefited from greatly.
Yeah. And I think that one of my favorite things about the conference in general, like the whole Milken Conference, other than that, is some of the people that you get to meet. Like some of the people that you get to meet that you wouldn't, like you meet them from all around the world. You meet different things, different niches and context. And I know this is your first time going, so you probably already noticed when you're there. I know you've been to many of the other conferences, IMF and all the other like big conferences, but this one has kind of like, to me, a little bit of a collegial feel, like year after year, you'll see some of the same people. Second year, third year, after a while, I like to say first year you go, it's, eyes wide open. And by third or fourth year, your family. I don't know. That's just my culture.
I look forward to that. I look forward to the next edition of it. And, maybe by then I'll have had also maybe matured my thinking about some of the topics that were not really front and center of my conversations this year.
Well, let's get into some of these questions too. So coming from your background, what do you consider as the main pressures that African countries are facing currently?
Okay, Adam, that's a
big one. It's a big question to open with. I know that's a big one.
But that's okay. I think first to appreciate this, I think there are several types of shocks. And I think the way to look at it is we have just recovered, or we had been recovering from the COVID type shocks. And then along with other countries in the world, Africa has had multiple external and internal shocks that have, in some sense, imperiled the recovery, but also may create a sort of a reversal of the gains that we had seen over the last 2 decades. So what are these shocks? And I begin with the external. First, of course, the rising trade tensions. That has been around. Of course, we have seen a lot of development of that, discussions, but I think that is front and center of all the concerns that anybody has, even at the Milken conference. This was the big item. Now, of course, around that, you have a lot of other uncertainties. And somebody said, the level of uncertainty is completely unprecedented. So not only on trade, but also, for instance, in the US, the issue of the fiscal stance. Now, of course, we have the new big bill that is going through the various approval processes. And then, of course, deregulation. And the big one that we have seen more recently is immigration. Now, those items obviously relate to the US particularly, but not only the US, because the US is a key player, is really the most important economy or driver of the global economy. So that's one set of shocks. Then, of course, you have the geopolitics. And this has worsened over the last month, as you can imagine, the conflicts that we had seen. We've seen Ukraine, we've seen Gaza, but now we have Iran and the potential of worse, a world war or whatever else it is. So that is a big one. There's also at this moment or at this time, the African nations are facing what I would call exorbitant terms from the capital markets. So they are unable to borrow at appropriate terms, and that we can discuss what that causes that. But the point is that these are pressures that obviously apply to most countries around the world, but they fall disproportionately hard on the developing countries and in particular Africa. So that is one set of issues. Secondly, we have the issues of domestic shocks, right, in the African countries. And one of these, of course, is the limited fiscal space that we have seen. They have limited room for maneuver. But at the same time, there's the other issue of the debt crisis that has emerged. 2024 was the costliest year in more than 3 decades. Actually, you need to go back, way back before even HIPC sort of sessions, etc., to get the same level of debt service, that the debt service burden in our countries. Now, it is a crisis. Why? Because it has pushed out the expenses on, let's say, or the possibilities of spending on health and education. So more than half the countries in Africa are spending more on debt, external debt payments than they do on health and education. Mm. That is a major issue.
Yeah, that's alarming, right? Like
it is completely alarming. Mm. And then, of course, you have the issue of third item on the domestic side, which is the discontent that is being expressed by the population, particularly the youth. Yeah, because they don't see opportunities, they don't see accountability of the government, etc. Now, I'm in Kenya today, yesterday, really. I mean, there are protests on the streets. And a lot of this is really about the discontent of the youth. They're realizing or expressing their dislike for, the trend that the policymakers have been doing and all that. So those are the general issues. Again, they fall disproportionately hard on the African countries. But at the same time, of course, everything isn't all dark and gloomy, because 11 of the 20 fastest economies in the world are in Africa. Now, the trouble is that still is not providing enough oomph, let's say, opportunities for the people, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, there's a lot of opportunities, one can say, if you look, or a lot of potential, if you look at the demographic dividends and resources. But, these need to be baked. I mean, you can say, well, you have, like you want to bake a cake, you need flour, you need butter, you need water, you need sugar, whatever. But if they're just sitting on the kitchen table, you're not going to get much of a cake out of it. So I think those are the concerns I would want to sort of flag. And we do hope that the countries, that this whole issue is reversed in some way, which obviously we can discuss.
Yeah. So how do you see these countries kind of reacting to some of these pressures? Now, obviously, we talked about multiple, so any of them you want to pull out, and I know each country's going to react a little bit differently, but are there some general themes?
Yeah, I think the first of this is, to look at the biggest of all items. The biggest of all items relates to the trade shocks. And so they have to deal with that, let's say, issue. A lot of them have actually begun to indicated their interest in negotiating and coming up with, a sort of a more concerted outcome instead of the one-way tariffs or the unilateral tariffs that have been imposed. I know they are being called something else, but whatever they are, it is unilateral. And basically, there is some discussion there that need to be done. Political, but it is there. I think we should also understand that for African countries, tariffs, a lot of countries, for instance, in Kenya and other countries as well, but Kenya in particular, their exports to the U.S. were primarily through a preferential arrangement under the so-called African Growth and Opportunity Act. Now, that, in effect, meant tax-free or, tariff-free entry into the U.S. market. Now, the minimum tariffs that have been imposed on the African countries or have been discussed with African countries is 10%. So, in effect, what you're saying is that whole ANGOA, as we call it, the African Growth Opportunities Act, is no more, right? In any event, this needed to be negotiated because it was coming to an end in September. But the point I'm making is that whole discussion needs to be had in some ways. Secondly, of course, the countries themselves, the African countries, need to then look inwardly, stabilize their own economies, boost confidence, protect the lives and livelihoods of the weakest, etc., strengthen their domestic markets in some ways. That is a whole, let's say, agenda, a whole set of agendas that have been there for some time. But the point is, this is the time you have no choice now but to clean your house in particular ways. Thirdly, diversifying. There's no doubt diversification of trading partners, economic sectors, etc., is key, to navigating this space. I think that is fundamental in many ways. And then, of course, continue pushing on closing various gaps. Infrastructure, for instance, in critical sectors, you think about energy, for instance, and there's a push now to have 300 million more Africans connected to the electricity, basically. It doesn't have to be grid, but by the year 2030. Now, having said all that, it is important to remember that we also need to continue to invest in what I call social capital, education, health. All these are things that are, one would say they are no-brainers. But the fact that they are being pushed aside by other items like debt payments is a problem. Finally, this issue of debt. I think one of the things that we have been doing is making the case that this is the time for having a conversation with let's say, the debtors and the creditors need to get together and come up with a sort of a debt relief arrangement with the highly indebted countries that, will continue on this downward spiral and will obviously be problematic for the global economy. So that is some of the things that can be done. There are others, but I wish to stop there.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll tell you what, Patrick, there's going to have to be some more follow-up interviews or something on this.
Absolutely.
I know we just scratched the surface on this, so I'm excited to continue maybe we break down some of the individual issues. But for today's episode, if somebody wants to follow up and if they want to connect with you or learn more about your work or follow you on social media or anywhere else, how do they do that?
I'm active on LinkedIn. So you could just search my name on LinkedIn, Patrick Njoroge. Yep. And I'm the former central bank governor. I'm there, so that should be easy. I'm also on Twitter, but I've not been active on Twitter. Really, I used to be one of the most active central bankers on Twitter, but now, we call it X now. But whatever it is, the new name, old name, I'm also there. That is, my handle is simple, and my last name and P. One word. And I'm available on those links so anybody can DM me and we can take it from there.
Perfect. For everybody listening, just so you know, we'll put some links in the show notes so you could just click on the link and head right on over. And speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Each and every day we're bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way in your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Patrick, thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to meeting you again on this show.